For the longest time, I couldn't put a name to who I was. I didn't have an image of anybody else who was like me, and it was torturous.
If I saw myself somewhere, anywhere, as a teenager, I know that I would have saved a lot of money on my therapy sessions.
When I was young and seeing films for the first time that had gay and lesbian characters, I felt at home.
So I would just scan the shelves of Blockbuster, just looking for anything with like 2 men hugging or 2 women. And anything I could find, I would get.
We all understand the same stories. You know, where you're sticking, whatever you're sticking, in whoever you're sticking it, doesn't really matter.
I think films do make a difference.
Yeah.
I think they get under people's skin and they reflect our lives and our experiences back to us.
I'd love to see a movie that reflects that world that we live in.
That would be nice to see, if only it weren't a sin.
Damn it.
Many of us grew up during a period when there was a de facto mainstream media blackout on our lives. Stories about us were not allowed to be told, and literal queer representation was completely forbidden.
In the post-war period, it's hard to really talk about a gay and lesbian cinema, and it's even hard to talk about a gay and lesbian audience. They're not going to gay films. Those don't really exist. People couldn't sit around watching Queer as Folk or The L Word. So instead what you have are, well, it's sort of a gender split. I think that the gay boys are sort of watching physique films and fantasizing about bodies and not wanting sand kicked in their face. And the girls are busy at the drugstore buying pulp novels with kind of dreamy covers. And so I think that people's fantasies are being fed, but their identities haven't yet really begun to form in what we think of as a modern sense. And maybe the place that you see some change starting to happen in Hollywood isn't out of the studios at all. It's in maybe the bedroom of this boy who's growing up in Hollywood, and his name is Kenneth Anger. And at the end of the 40s, he stays in his bedroom and fulfills his fantasies by making fireworks. If you look at fireworks, it's not that far from a physique film. It's these kind of muscle guys. They're in their Navy uniforms. It becomes, in a way, the kind of precursor to a whole American art cinema tradition. And it's almost a kind of bridge film for a gay sensibility. Censorship cases are being fought over pornography in the 60s, but they're also being fought over much smaller films that would seem to be much less threatening. And then, because you have supposedly an orgy on screen in Flaming Creatures, and inappropriate body parts are being juxtaposed to inappropriate body parts. And that's enough in 1964 to get you arrested.
You have to remember how much fun it was to see those movies, because the police would raid it and arrest the audience. I mean, imagine going to the movies today and being taken away in a paddy wagon. That didn't happen to me, but it did happen.
I remember sneaking with my best friend in his car and driving out to a remote area of Houston where I was from, where they were showing an Andy Warhol series. This was kind of an art house that was way in the north end of town, which nobody paid any attention to. I lived very far away, so I knew no one would have seen me go there.
First kind of Warhol queer film was Blowjob, you know, where it was just a close-up on a guy's face while he was getting a real blowjob. Not only is it art, but it's queer and it's erotic. That was really the beginning of a queer sensibility in a big way, in the public's imagination, you know, in a cultural way, was Warhol.
Before Andy, gay men were kind of square in the movies. You had hip gay people that were on speed and listened to rock and roll and opera and took diet pills, and, you know, and that's the kind I like still.
Especially during the years of the production code, European cinema is where Americans turned for sex. And fortunately, gay and lesbian sexiness was not an exception. A lot of films came over that challenged all kinds of things, including a kind of homophobic lens on life. The gay and lesbian filmmakers became especially important in that period before Stonewall, like Derek Jarman, like Pasolini, like Visconti, like Fassbinder. Somebody who becomes very important is Chantal Akerman, the Belgian-French filmmaker who's still making films now. Her first feature film was called Je tu il elle, and it was an avant-garde film of a love affair between two women, in bed and out of bed.
It must be a 10-minute scene between these two women in black and white, pretty much static camera, wide camera, and these women, it's as if they're having oral sex, but it's almost like, totally like they're gymnasts. But what that scene does, and why that scene is so brilliant, is that it makes you aware of how every sex scene you've ever seen is totally conventional.
Stonewall and other movements of liberation in this country created the climate for stories that had long been forbidden to be told for the first time.
What the Stonewall riots did do was galvanize gay and lesbian activists across the country into a new way of thinking. It was about visibility, it was about standing up. Of course, that impacted the kinds of work that people did in film as well who were gay and lesbian, and began the documenting of the movement.
Are you gay? Yes, I am. Are you gay? Yes. Are you gay? Yes. Are you
What people begin to look to as the 70s go on is the whole sphere of independent documentary. And that's where you begin to find a picturing of community, a reclaiming of histories.
What's his name? Liberace was on television then, and you know, I have like, you know, he was the epitome of a sissy. I don't know how in the name of Christ the man ever got on TV in the 1950s. But, you know, he had that enormous smile on the whole trip, and I had an enormous smile. So they used, you know, and I laughed at everything, and I smiled and was nice to people. So my nickname became like Liberace.
Word Is Out was a film I saw when I was still in high school. Not only was the film itself important, but the way the makers got together was very important. They were a communal group. They had a purpose in making this film, and that was to show gay lives as gay lives.
It's really scary standing in isolation from everybody else, and that's what I feared most in my life, the fact that I wasn't part of a group.
It not only showed gay people's lives telling their own stories, but had an Asian person, Danny, a bona fide Chinese American, talking about being gay. What I remember is just the notion that you can pick up a camera and film your life.
In the 70s, the whole idea of coming out and announcing to your family, to friends, that you're gay or lesbian began to emerge much more. The idea of trying to get rights was coupled with the idea, of course, of being open, because that was what impacted your not having rights. We saw the depictions within gay art and gay culture itself start to portray people as people who should be open about who they are and not hide and not stay in the shadows, but be proud. That was a dramatic shift in the 1970s.
When I came out, I started collecting trailers and marketing materials of gay films. I wanted to share them with people. You know, it would be like, wow, look at this amazing thing. And, you know, this is our history. Boys in the Band, The Licorice Quartet, Therese and Isabel, one of my favorite movies. I pretty much have a poster or a press book from every gay movie released all the way up to the late 90s. Wow, that's a good one. This is an old exploitation movie. It's a kind of little subgenre.
The cats, scratching and clawing at each other's sex secrets and finding physical tendencies they never knew they had.
There were dozens of lesbian-themed exploitation movies made in the 60s and 70s, and they were made for straight male audiences. There's no question about that. To Ingrid, my love, Lisa. Ingrid said yes, Lisa said yes, and Nils didn't say no. They're so great. They're so explicit. You know, it is lesbian visibility. Not exactly what we had in mind, but...
The Bull Dyke will now do her work.
I'd like to introduce the most beautiful woman in the world, the fabulous Dawn Davenport.
What is so gay about John Waters movies? What is so gay about drag queens eating shit? It's just the outrage. It's the fabulous outrage. You knew these films were being made by someone who was an outsider, who had a slightly twisted view on the world around him. And that spoke to me. It was like, oh my God, I'm not the only one.
John Waters, he invented his brand of community-based independent cinema, and he invented an entire strain of American queer cinema.
Started the whole thing over. Oh, you see, gentlemen of the press, they sent me in the turret. They sent me a turret, special delivery.
My films, if there are gay characters, they have problems. You know, I make it more complicated than just gay. Just gay is too easy.
I'm straight. I mean, I like a lot of queers, but I don't think they're equipment, you know? I like women.
But you could change. Queers are just better. I'd be so proud if you was a fag and had a nice beautician boyfriend. I'd never have to worry.
There ain't nothing to worry about.
I worry that you work in an office, have children, celebrate wedding anniversaries. The world of heterosexual is a sick and boring life.
The world of heterosexual is a sick and boring life. Well, I joke it was market testing because every gay person applauded in the audience. But it was, once again, it was the opposite of coming out. It was a mother forcing her straight son to be gay when he wasn't. What I always do is take the cliches of gay culture and try to make fun of it in a good way. You know, obviously, I always say I vote gay. And I guess that's what counts.
I think Divine was probably, you know, the first drag person on film that I was aware of.
Drag is so important to our people. I mean, drag set our people free. So many people think that drag is just sort of like putting on a wig and it's just